let's start with that. Let's start out with the Wizards. So the Wizards decide to blow it up, which it's something I think a lot of people have been asking for the last couple of seasons. The Wizards have been, I don't want to use the word mediocre, but they've been one of those teams that's what we call NBA purgatory. One of those teams that you think will probably make the playoffs. You don't have them as a title contender. You don't think they have a real threat to, have a deep playoff run, but they just kept running it back. The John Wall and Bradley Beal years were fun. They were really good. I think there was potential there. They had some building blocks between those two and had the opportunity to build up that roster and continue to grow. But injuries happen. That's the crazy thing about the NBA. John Wall goes down with injury. Bradley Beal steps it up and has some career seasons for a little bit there, makes some all-star teams, pairs up with Russell Westbrook. And then Bradley Beal ends up injured for the last season. The thing is, during, I would say, the last 3-4 years, a lot of people, myself included, have been wondering if and when the Wizards would finally say, you know what, it's time to pack it up. It's time to move on. They finally did it, and they started out with, I'm clicking everything, and they started out with trading Bradley Beal. So let's talk about the Bradley Beal trade first. It's happened. There's still a missing piece, kind of, sort of. We're going to see what happens here. But essentially, Bradley Beal, Jordan Goodwin, a guard, and Isaiah Todd, a forward, get traded to the Suns for Chris Paul, Landry Shamet, and for what looks like right now, either a handful of second-round picks or some second-round pick swaps. All the details aren't fully out yet, at least from what I could tell earlier today, because the Wizards are still trying to find a replacement, a third team to pair up in that Chris Paul trade to move Chris Paul's contract and maybe get some pieces back for him. So that's at least, I guess I'll say, a good thing. So let's talk about this. Like I said, it's time for the Wizards. It was time for the Wizards to move on, in my opinion. I want to talk about the Suns piece of this first, because the main two things, reduce stream lag. The main two things that I've noticed that people are talking about when it comes to the Suns is, one, I don't think this deal is over. Like, I think the Suns will continue to make moves. I don't think the Suns are done making whatever moves they want to make. They have a couple of options here. We'll get into what their options look like in a second in terms of building out the rest of this roster. But just off the initial, so many people have just answering the question of, was this a smart move? Was this a mistake? No, this wasn't a mistake, in my opinion. This move makes 100% sense. This move, when you think about, not to get into the weeds here, because I'll be honest, I don't fully understand it myself. I feel like I'm rereading about the new CBA every day to fully understand it, because we spent so long learning about the old CBA and now these new rules are there. It's just going to take some time for us all to get used to it. And the GMs and presidents and owners are even navigating through these new rules as they try to make deals. So they get Kevin Durant last year. They make a big swing. Mikal Bridges goes to the Nets. They get Kevin Durant. They add Bradley Beal. So now you're looking at a core four of Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, and DeAndre Ayton. That's your core four right now, if you will. Now, to my understanding, we all know there's the salary cap, then there's luxury tax, and then now they have this thing what they're calling the second apron. From everything I can tell, the Suns were, as we all know, were considering waiving Chris Paul. We saw that report maybe like 3 weeks ago or so. We saw the report that the Suns were considering waiving Chris Paul. They at least met to see what their options would be moving forward. Maybe stretch out his contract. They wanted to do something different, right? The Suns, I think, realized that with even just Ayton, Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, in order to add another piece, they were probably going to end up going through that second apron. Even if you did waive Chris Paul, it was only going to they weren't going to be able to use the full amount of Chris Paul's contract to make a move. It was only going to be the partial guarantees that are going to end up with like $18 million in cap space. A lot of information here. But essentially, the Suns ownership, shout out to Matt Ishbia, that man got deep pockets because he's willing to pay some serious luxury tax penalties. But essentially, they figured, we have this one opportunity to move all of Chris Paul's contract and get it. Even if you ignore the contract of Bradley Beal, you can get an all-star caliber player. Now, he's made a couple of all-star teams over the last couple of seasons. I don't know if he'll make an all-star team this year, if everybody's healthy, especially in the Western Conference. But an all-star caliber player on a crazy contract, but an all-star caliber player nonetheless. So going for Brad was a no-brainer. Does it leave you with a lot of questions? Yes. Does it leave you with some holes? Sure. But the move makes sense. It was a no-brainer move, in my opinion. Now, let's talk about what the on-court might look like. Granted, they still have some time to fill out the rest of this roster. We'll talk about it in a second. I got a tweet I want to share with y'all. They still have some time to, like I said, try to build this roster around them. But just looking at some of the things Bradley Beal brings to this team. 20 point per game score. I want to say he was like mid-20s this past season. If I'm not mistaken, I was looking at it the other day. It slipped my mind right now. I apologize. A guy who can catch and shoot threes. He's around 40%. Was one thing that the Suns needed, and we noticed in the playoffs when the ball is in KD's and Booker's hands creating, they were kicking it out, and guys like Torrey Craig they weren't hitting their shots at the clip that they wanted them to. Beal shoots at a 40% clip. Another thing that a lot of people are saying Beal could bring to the Suns is a guy who can, I'm going to put it in quotation marks because I don't believe in it as much as others, attack the rim. Now, Beal technically attacks the rim at a higher clip than Booker and Durant, but not at a high enough clip that one of the things that the Suns, Monty Williams talked about this a couple of times in the playoffs and a press conference and throughout the season, was the free throw disparity that the Suns were experiencing versus some of the other teams that they were playing in the playoffs and throughout the regular season. Newsflash, it's because Devin Booker and Kevin Durant are mid-range shooters. They don't drive to the rim. While, yes, Bradley Beal does drive more than them, he's not a foul. He doesn't draw a foul. So I still think they're going to struggle with that. In terms of playmaking, the first thing that came to my mind, losing Chris Paul, losing a guy who was one of the top playmakers in the league. As much as we have gripes about Chris Paul and say, injury and going to break down in the playoffs, not the same player he used to be, one thing he can still do is control the tempo of a game and could play make for his team. I just had a full brain fart there for a second. It's not the exact same, but when Chris Paul went down with his injury in the playoffs this year, somebody who stepped up big in terms of playmaking was Devin Booker. I think Devin Booker has learned a lot over the last 2 seasons with Chris Paul in terms of playmaking. I expect him to, as weird as it sounds, be the one for this team, unless they make another fringe move. But in terms of their go-to playmaker, I think a lot of responsibility is going to fall in Devin Booker's hands. Bradley Beal can do a little bit alongside of him. We've seen Bradley Beal have the ball in his hands more after John Wall went down with injury and it ends up traded. We saw that version of Bradley Beal, but I think the version the Suns want and need more from him even is the version of Bradley Beal that played with John Wall. The version of Bradley Beal that was used to catching and shooting, cutting, playing without the ball in his hands 24/7, because the ball's going to be in Booker and KD's hands. I still think, obviously, there's a lot of holes in this team. Defense is a big question. One of the things everybody was talking about of what is the defense on this team as of right now. There's only 8 guys on the team. They got to still fill out the roster. To be honest, I don't think they're going to fill out the roster with elite tier defenders or elite players. So it's going to be fringe role players that might bring some of the guys back to have bird rights to or restricted. I know they could probably bring back Lindell. I think they can bring back Torrey Craig. And those guys are solid defensively, but they're not stoppers, especially when you think about a starting lineup. And as crazy as it sounds for the Suns, their starting lineup defensively are going to be leaning heavily on, and this sounds disgusting, Kevin Durant. I think is probably going to be their best, unless DeAndre Ayton proves to me otherwise. Kevin Durant might be their best rim protector, which is disgusting. And I think the guy who's going to be their point of attack defender, especially against other guards and against other point guards, is going to be Devin Booker. And I've seen a lot of people this week tell me that Devin Booker is I'll say at least solid defender. I don't necessarily see that happening for him in terms of being a defender and asking him to play defense and run around and chase whatever point guard he's guarding on the other team, distribute the ball and be the primary playmaker for his team and get buckets. And you're asking essentially the same thing of Kevin Durant in terms of defense and getting buckets. I don't want to jinx it, but I think you're asking one of them to get injured again. We saw Devin Booker sit out for a significant amount of time for the first time in his career injury. Kevin Durant's been battling with injury ever since his Achilles situation. And especially in the postseason when you're only playing 7, 8 guys, I think you're just asking a lot from those two. But like I said, I think they made the right move here. Truthfully, the Suns made the right move. Like it will be, it's not going to be easy for the Suns to make their cap space situation just work. I'm not gonna lie to y'all and say it's going to be like the easiest thing in the world to do for the Suns in terms of making their cap space work. But let's check this out from John Tortorelli. The Suns don't need cap space. In fact, that understanding likely played a huge role in acquiring Bradley Beal. So this was a nice little breakdown of the second apron and what that looks like in terms of if you're past the second apron, you can't use the mid-level, the taxpayer mid-level exception for a contract. You can't use TPE generated from the prior year. Starting next season, your team's picks are frozen. The first year it exceeds the second apron, and then it is moved. Like, it's a lot of things that happen. You can't pick up how the rule works. If the Heat are a second apron team during the 24-25 season, they're not allowed to trade their 2032 first round pick, and the pick is deemed frozen. The Warriors are a second apron team in the 24-25, 25-26, 26-27 seasons. Good Lord. Then their 2032 first will be moved to the end of the first round. For example, their 14th pick will automatically become the 30th. It is very, very weird. My point is here, though, right, is they at least have, for this upcoming free agency, their mid-level exception. They have a $40 million biannual. They have vet minimums, which are $2 to $3 million. Bird rights on Torrey Craig, like we talked about. Bird rights on Jacques Lindell. Bird rights on Bismack Biyombo. All three of those guys, I think they could easily bring back just to fill out a roster. Darius Baisley is a restricted free agent. Those 3-4 guys, I think, could be key in terms of just bringing people back to fill out a roster for the Suns. Another key piece, I think, which a lot of people are discussing. Personally, I don't think it's the move for them to make, and that is moving DeAndre Ayton. Two reasons I don't think you should move DeAndre Ayton. One is his contract. Well, they both are the same reason. His contract and his value is tanked after the playoffs. A lot of, I think, the back and forth and why we weren't seeing what version we all wanted to see of DeAndre Ayton, especially myself. Like, I'm an Ayton fan. Like, I think he has potential. I still think he has potential. I still think he could be a really good center in this league. I have not seen the version of DeAndre Ayton that the Suns need yet. I just simply haven't. He likes to post up when they want a pick and roll guy. He likes that little mid-range jumper sometimes that's not as consistent as I feel like it needs to be. For as much as he likes to shoot it, he's not necessarily a bruiser, go get it off the rim, get the offensive rebound, punch it in your face. Like, he's not that type of big. However, I think him and Monty, it was clear they had their differences. Him and Monty Williams had their differences after the NBA Finals run they had. I think some of that waned on their relationship throughout the season. There's a new head coach in town. Frank Vogel is there. Let's see what Frank can do. You still got some time. I say, personally, keep Ayton. Because even if you move him, from what I can see looking around the league, I don't think there's at least a solid enough deal that's also going to return you a center. Because if you move Ayton, who's your starting center now? Do you start Biyombo or Jacques Lindell as your starting center on the team that's trying to win a championship? Personally, doesn't seem like a great idea. I say keep Ayton. Run your little big four or your Snickers, run whatever you want to call it. Big four, big two, and two others. Like, I don't care what you want to call it, but I say keep all four and just try to fill out a roster around it. Give Frank Vogel an opportunity to try to coach Ayton differently. And if it doesn't work, move him by the trade deadline. But personally, I think you just have the opportunity to keep him. Is the best move in my mind. Also, last thing on the Suns, they had to go all in. You get it when you get a new owner. This is what a new owner does. And there's the one piece of caution I have, and I think they realize this, and we'll just have to see how it plays out. When you get a new owner wants to come in and be like, yo, I just spent billions. I want, to an extent, honestly, I want a quick return on my investment, to an extent. And a quick return on your investment in terms of ownership in the NBA is a championship, or at the very, very least, a very deep playoff run that sells a lot of tickets. So he makes the move. 2 weeks after Matt Ishbia bought the team, Kevin Durant was traded for. And then Ayton was given his money. And then they fired Monty Williams. Oh, I'm sorry. Ayton was given his money at the beginning of the season, but you fire Monty Williams and now you trade for Bradley Beal. Matt Ishbia is moving and he's moving quickly. The only backside or potential downfall of that, you go all in, and if it doesn't work, you're looking at blowing it up for, I don't want to say nothing, but you might feel like you at least gave it your best shot, and if it don't work, you got to blow it up. I'm looking at you, Clippers. We'll talk about that in a second. Tons of rumors that Paul George might be getting moved, but that's an example of a team that made an all-in move, traded away a ton of picks, and if it don't work, you just blow it up and you tank for a couple of years and you try it again. Like, that's just the cycle of an NBA team. So breaking news,